been restless all evening, pacing the narrow hallway of the old row house Jonah had inherited from an uncle he barely knew. The place had stood empty for years, and houses that sat too long collected noises the way old men collected scars. Pipes knocked. Floorboards clicked. Wind slipped through window seams and made the bricks breathe at night. But Shadow wasn't barking at the house. He was barking at one brick. Not the whole wall. Not the dark hallway. Not the basement door beneath the stairs. One brick. A single red brick halfway up the plaster-stripped wall at the far end of the corridor, just left of a rusted radiator, and 2 feet above the faded wooden trim. Shadow stood rigid in front of it, tail stiff, ears raised, chest heaving, and barked with a harsh urgency Jonah had not heard since the dog pulled him away from a booby-trapped doorway outside Mosul. That stopped him. Jonah lowered the hammer he'd been using to pry old nails from a boarded window and stared at the dog. "What is it?" Shadow barked again, then scratched the floor once, paced a tight circle, and returned to the exact same spot in front of the wall. Jonah's pulse tightened. That dog had worked with him through 2 deployments attached to a Navy SEAL unit in places where hesitation got men zipped into bags. Shadow wasn't a pet who barked at dust or mice or settling wood. If he locked onto something, there was a reason. Always. Jonah crossed the hall slowly, boots soft on the warped runner. The house smelled like damp plaster, cold brick, and the stale ghost of cigarettes. Outside, rain tapped at the front windows in an uneven rhythm. Somewhere upstairs, a loose shutter knocked once in the wind. Shadow backed away from the wall, just enough to let Jonah approach, but he did not stop growling. That was new. Jonah crouched and ran his fingers over the brick. It felt like old brick felt. Cold. Rough. Mortar crumbling at the edges. Nothing unusual. Then Shadow suddenly snapped his head toward the front of the house and barked once. Sharp, warning, immediate. Jonah froze and listened. Silence. No knock at the door. No footstep on the porch. No vehicle outside. Just rain and the faint sound of water moving in the gutters. He looked back at the wall. The brick Shadow was fixated on wasn't cleaner than the rest. Wasn't cracked differently. Wasn't painted over. But the mortar line around it did seem neater. Straighter. Like someone had touched up only that section after the rest of the wall had already aged. Jonah leaned closer. The mortar was newer. Not fresh, not recent, but newer than everything around it. Shadow whined low in his throat, then shoved his nose hard into Jonah's shoulder, and backed up again, as if trying to move him away from the wall. Away. Not closer. That changed everything. "What do you smell?" Jonah whispered. Shadow did something even worse then. He sat down. But he didn't relax. He sat the way he used to sit before mortar rounds landed, tense, fixed, watching, like the next few seconds mattered more than the last 10 years. Jonah stood slowly. He knew that look. And suddenly, without warning, so did his body. His heartbeat slowed instead of sped up. Vision sharpened. Breath steadied. The broken version of him that spent the last 3 years jumping at slammed doors and waking with Daniel Cross screaming under collapsed concrete in his head fell backward for a second, and the old operator stepped forward. Observe first. Touch second. Never trust the obvious. Jonah stepped away from the wall. The moment he did, Shadow rose and barked again at the brick, then turned and barked toward the floor under the radiator. Jonah followed the angle. There, against the baseboard and half hidden by peeling paint, was a fine copper wire no thicker than fishing line. His blood went cold. It ran from beneath the radiator pipe, up the trim, and disappeared into the mortar seam around the brick. Tripwire? No. Not exactly. Trigger lead. Jonah dropped instantly and grabbed Shadow by the harness, pulling them both back down the hallway. They hit the kitchen threshold just as a floorboard under the corridor gave a soft protesting creak. Nothing happened. No blast. No spark. No movement. But now he understood. Someone had hidden something behind the wall and wired the brick to something else. Maybe alarm. Maybe charge. Maybe both. And this dog had just saved him again. Jonah looked at Shadow, one hand still locked in the thick fur at the back of his neck. "Good boy!" Shadow licked once at the air, never taking his eyes off the hall. Then, from somewhere above them, came a dull thump. Jonah's head snapped up. Second floor. Not the shutter this time. Too centered. Too heavy. Shadow heard it too, and growled toward the ceiling. The house suddenly felt occupied. Jonah moved fast. He crossed the kitchen, yanked open the drawer where he'd tossed his flashlight and multi-tool, then opened the metal case he kept under the table. Inside lay the pistol he told himself he only kept because the neighborhood was bad. He checked the chamber by instinct, killed the kitchen light, and returned to the hall. The brick sat in darkness now, faintly silvered by rain light from the front room. Shadow did not advance. That alone told Jonah he had the priorities right. Upstairs first. They climbed quietly, Jonah taking the outer edge of each step to avoid the worst squeaks, Shadow one stair ahead, and moving so low he was almost crawling. On the landing, the dog stopped dead and turned his head toward the back bedroom. The door stood half open. Jonah knew he had left it closed. His skin tightened. He nudged the door wider with the pistol muzzle. The room was empty. Old dresser. Covered mirror. Water stain on the ceiling. One torn curtain moving slightly from a cracked window latch. No intruder. No movement. Then Shadow barked at the closet. Jonah crossed fast, yanked the door open. Nothing. Until he looked down. Mud on the closet floor. Fresh. A boot print. One print only, partial, but enough. Somebody had been inside the house after Jonah arrived. Shadow left the room before Jonah could process it, and trotted down the short back hall to the smallest upstairs room, the one Jonah had been using to stack unopened boxes from the move. He barked at the window there, then at the wall beneath it, then back toward Jonah. A trail. Jonah saw it a second later. More mud. Tiny droplets, spaced like someone had stepped carefully to avoid leaving too much sign. They led from the window to the wall, then stopped. Not because the person vanished. Because they had cleaned. Jonah shone the flashlight along the baseboard and found a rag shoved behind a radiator valve, still damp with muddy water. Whoever came in hadn't just searched. They tried to erase the search. Shadow whined once, sharp and frustrated, then spun back toward the stairs, dragging Jonah's attention with him. The dog wanted the hallway wall again. The brick. Jonah followed him back down, faster now, every sense stretched thin. Rain hammered harder at the front windows. Wind pushed against the old house in long, low breaths. The hallway downstairs seemed darker than before, the brick wall waiting at the far end like it knew it had been noticed. Shadow stopped 10 feet away from it, and refused to move closer. Jonah stayed beside him. No heroics. No stupid curiosity. The old him might have pressed right up to the wall and started cutting wires. The new him knew better. Daniel Cross had died because Jonah once assumed the first trap was the only trap. He crouched and traced the visible copper line with the flashlight. Radiator. Trim. Brick seam. But when he shifted the beam lower, he caught something else beneath the wallpaper peel near the floor. A second line, black instead of copper, running away from the wall and disappearing under the hall table by the stairs. A branching trigger. Not amateur. This had been designed by someone patient. Jonah followed the black line carefully to the table and looked underneath. Taped beneath the underside, hidden from normal view, was a small matte box with one blinking red light. Alarm transmitter. Live. Shadow barked so sharply the sound slapped off the walls. The blinking light changed from slow to fast. Jonah's stomach dropped. Somewhere outside, tires hissed over wet pavement and stopped in front of the house. Headlights washed pale across the front room curtains. Shadows spun toward the door and erupted into furious barking. Jonah killed the flashlight instantly and stepped back into the kitchen shadow, pistol up, heartbeat now steady in the way that only happened when danger finally stopped being abstract. A car door opened outside. Then another. And in the dark hallway, behind the one brick Shadow had been trying to keep him away from all night, something inside the wall gave a soft mechanical click, like a lock had just opened from the other side. Jonah did not breathe. The mechanical click inside the wall was small, almost polite, but in the dark hallway it sounded louder than the car doors outside. Shadow's barking turned savage. He planted himself between Jonah and the front entry, then swung back toward the wall again, torn between the threat coming from outside and the one hidden inside the house. That told Jonah everything. The brick wall wasn't just a trap. It was an access point. Another sound came from behind the bricks. A soft scrape. Then a second click. Then the almost silent grind of something old and heavy shifting inside the wall cavity. Outside, footsteps moved up the porch. Not hurried. Not panicked. Measured. Professional. Jonah backed deeper into the kitchen shadow and took one knee beside the doorway, pistol aligned with the hall. Shadow came to him instantly, low and rigid, ears tracking both directions. Rain hissed against the windows. The old refrigerator hummed once and fell silent, like even the house knew noise had become dangerous. A flashlight beam cut briefly through the front room curtains. Then a man's voice came through the front door. Mercer. Low. Calm. Confident enough to make Jonah's stomach tighten. Very few people in this city knew his address. Fewer still knew his name well enough to sound comfortable using it in the dark. He said nothing. The voice came again. You need to step away from the hallway. Shadow barked once, deep and violent. Jonah's fingers settled tighter along the frame of the trigger. Who are you? A pause. Then, if I tell you the truth, you'll shoot through the door. Not an answer. Not good enough. Something inside the wall clicked again. Jonah risked one fast glance toward the brick. A section of mortar line had widened. Barely. Just enough to show a black seam around the brick Shadow had been fixated on all night. The single brick was not a brick at all. It was a disguised faceplate, and whatever sat behind it was beginning to open. The man outside heard the shift too. His voice sharpened. You're out of time. The trigger already pinged. If the panel opens before I get inside, everyone in this house dies. Jonah almost laughed at the manipulation. Almost. Then Shadow did something he had never done before. The dog left the door. He ran full speed at the wall, jumped, and slammed both front paws against the false brick panel with enough force to knock it half an inch inward. A faint electronic whine answered from inside the cavity. Alarm escalation. Jonah understood instantly. The wall mechanism was on a timer. The triggered alarm beneath the hall table had likely woken a second sequence hidden behind the brick. Whoever arrived outside was here because they received the signal. That didn't make them safe. It made them informed. Shadow barked again at Jonah, then at the wall, then back toward the stairs. Move. Decide. Jonah made the call. He rose low, crossed the hall in 3 silent steps, and ripped the black alarm box from beneath the table. The red light went from fast blink to solid. Live power. He jammed his multi-tool under the casing seam and tore. Plastic split. Wire spilled into the beam of his pocket light. Red. Black. Yellow. No time to guess. The voice outside said, "If you cut the yellow, you deadlock the internal release. If you cut the red, the charge arms." Jonah froze. That was useful. Too useful. He looked toward the door and said, "Still not telling me who you are." "No. But I'm telling you the truth." Shadow growled at the ceiling. New sound. A faint creak from upstairs. Not the settling house this time. Wait. There was someone on the second floor. Jonah felt the danger rearrange itself around him. The person at the front door wasn't alone. Either the intruder upstairs had gotten in earlier and planted the system, or someone was already inside trying to reach whatever was behind the wall before Jonah did. The dog was right. The house was occupied. Fast, without trusting the voice outside, Jonah cut the black wire first. Nothing. The red light stayed solid. He cut the yellow next. A heavy internal thunk sounded behind the wall. The seam around the false brick widened another fraction. Shadow barked sharply, but not in panic. Discovery? Jonah ripped the faceplate free. Behind it, recessed deep into the brick cavity, sat a small steel box no larger than a thick hardback book. A keypad glowed faint green beside it. Under the keypad was a brass pull tab, and wired directly to the rear of the box was a compact block of military-looking explosive putty molded into the cavity bricks. His blood turned cold. Not homemade junk. Not random criminal work. Someone had hidden a real Deadman package inside his hallway wall. The man outside spoke immediately. "You see it now." Jonah ignored him. On the steel box, almost hidden under grime and old dust, was a line of engraving. "Property return case/eyes," only that phrase hit somewhere old in him. Not because he had seen this exact box before, but because he knew the kind of operation that used language like that. Quiet recovery units, off-book chain of custody, things that traveled without normal records. Shadow whined low and nudged Jonah's arm. The dog wasn't looking at the box. He was looking at the keypad. Jonah swept the light across it. 4 digits. No scratches. No obvious wear pattern. Then he saw the smallest smear of dried mud on the lower right corner of the steel casing, and another on the top edge, as if someone with dirty fingers had opened it not long ago and closed it in a hurry. The mud wasn't from tonight's rain. It was darker. Older. Clay-rich. The same color as the dust caked on the boots upstairs. Someone had already been here. The person moving through his house tonight hadn't come to plant the device. They had come back for what was in the case. A floorboard creaked above him again. Closer now. At the head of the stairs. Shadow wheeled and barked upward. Jonah snapped the pistol toward the stairwell, just as a shape moved in the dark at the top landing, only for a second, just enough to show a shoulder, a gloved hand, and the pale flash of a face slipping back out of sight. There. Someone was definitely upstairs. The man outside the front door said, "If the thief gets to the back bedroom window, you lose your only leverage." Thief? Interesting word choice. Jonah kept the pistol up and said, "You sound like this is your box." The answer came instantly. "No. I'm the man your uncle stole it from." That landed. Not because Jonah believed him yet, but because it fit the house better than anything else had tonight. Uncle Ray had been the family ghost no one explained properly. Dead 2 months now, always moving, always flush with cash for a man with no real job, always making people at funerals nervous without ever raising his voice. Shadow barked hard toward the stairs again. The intruder upstairs was moving. Fast. Jonah made a decision. He grabbed the steel case by the pull tab, expecting resistance. Instead it slid free too easily. The explosive block behind it stayed in the cavity. Dummy tamper charge. Or spent. The real deterrent had been the alarm and the response team. The steel case was cold in his hand and much heavier than its size allowed. There was no time to admire that. He shoved it inside his jacket, turned toward the stairs, and the man outside finally lost his calm. "Don't take it upstairs!" That was the wrong thing to say, because now Jonah knew two things at once. The man outside didn't want the upstairs intruder reaching the case first, and he didn't want Jonah alone with whoever was already in the house. Shadow moved before Jonah did, charging for the stairs with a fury that made the air feel smaller. Jonah followed, taking the steps two at a time. Halfway up, the house lights came on. All of them. Hallway. Landing. Back room. Front room downstairs. A flood of yellow-white light washed the old house in sudden exposure. And there, standing at the end of the upstairs hall with muddy boots, wet hair, and a pistol pointed nowhere but held like she knew exactly how to use it, was a teenage girl no older than 17. She saw Jonah, saw Shadow, and saw the steel case under his arm. Then her face crumpled in relief so fast it broke the whole shape of the moment. "You found it," she whispered. And before Jonah could ask who she was, she looked straight at the case and said the one thing that turned the entire night into something far worse than theft. "My father died hiding that from your uncle." Jonah did not lower the pistol. Not because she looked dangerous. Because relief hit her face too fast. People who were chased, cornered, or lying often did that when they saw the one detail they came for. And this girl, mud on her jeans, rain in her hair, handgun steady despite the tremor in her breathing, was staring at the steel case under his arm like she had crossed hell to see it still existed. Shadow stopped halfway down the hall. The dog did not bark. That was the first thing Jonah noticed. The second was worse. Shadow's ears went forward, his body stiffened, and he gave a low uncertain sound in his throat, the sound he made when scent and memory collided in ways he didn't understand yet. The girl saw the dog and almost broke again. "He remembers me." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "I've never seen you before." "No," she said, voice thin from running in fear and something older. "But he has." A hard bang rattled the front door downstairs. The man outside had stopped pretending patience. Jonah flicked one glance toward the stairwell, then back to the girl. "Name?" She swallowed. "Eva." "No last name." Her grip tightened on the pistol. "Not one I'm safe using yet." Good answer. Too good for a random scared teenager. Shadow took one cautious step toward her. Jonah felt that in his bones. Shadow didn't advance on strangers in silence. If he moved closer, it meant the dog smelled something he was trying to place, not something he wanted to drive off. Eva saw it and lowered her free hand slightly, fingers open. "I'm not here for you," she said. "I'm here because if that case stays in this house another 5 minutes, everybody in it dies." Downstairs, the front door handle rattled once, then stopped. The man outside wasn't trying brute force yet. That meant he either had another way in, or knew forcing the door would trigger the wrong response. Jonah kept the pistol level. "You said your father died hiding this from my uncle." Eva nodded once. Her face had gone pale under the hall light. "Your uncle didn't steal it first. He took it after the house fire." House fire. The phrase hit somewhere deep and ugly. Jonah's mind snagged on a memory he had not touched in years. News footage from 5 winters ago of a duplex burning on the industrial edge of town. 3 dead. Accelerant suspected. No arrests. Just one more ugly little tragedy in a city built on them. Eva saw something move in his expression. "You remember it." "I remember a lot of fires," Jonah said. Her eyes hardened with sudden anger. "Mine was supposed to make everything disappear." That landed. Because no 17-year-old should say a sentence like that so flatly. Shadow whined once. The dog was almost at her now, nose high, reading her in layers. She stood absolutely still as he sniffed her sleeve, her wrist, then the side of her jacket pocket. When he reached the pocket, he froze and looked up at Jonah. Not threat. Recognition. "What's in your pocket?" Jonah asked. Eva didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached in slowly, very slowly, and pulled out a strip of faded green fabric wrapped around something small and metallic. Shadow's eyes locked on it instantly. Jonah knew the cloth before the object fully unfolded. It was a section of old military working dog harness webbing. Frayed. Smoke darkened. Edges cut rough. The metal clipped inside it was a broken name tab. Shad, only half the letters remained, but it was enough. Shadow gave a soft crack sound in his throat and pressed his muzzle against Eva's hand. Jonah felt the floor shift under the night. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Eva looked down at the dog, and this time the grief in her face was too real to fake. "My father kept it after the warehouse job. Said the dog was the only reason he lived long enough to get me out." The front window downstairs shattered. Not a gunshot. A glass cutter punch or tool strike. Precise. Fast. Followed by the thin metallic scrape of someone unlocking the interior latch from outside. The man at the front door had finally stopped waiting. Jonah moved instantly. He grabbed Eva by the elbow and pulled her into the nearest bedroom doorway as shadows spun and barked down the stairs. The dog's warning was no longer uncertain. The house had become a kill box. "Talk while we move," Jonah snapped. Eva yanked free of his grip, but followed him into the room. 5 years ago, my father helped move something that wasn't supposed to exist. He was told it was government property. It wasn't. It was evidence." Jonah looked at the steel case. "Of what?" She hesitated. That half-second told him the answer was bigger than a theft. Then she said, "Human trafficking routed through military shipping manifests." The room went still around those words. Even with footsteps moving below. Even with rain on the glass. Even with shadows snarling at the hallway. Jonah felt something in his chest go cold. "That's a big accusation. It's also true. How would your father know?" "Because he drove one of the trucks." That was one answer. The worst one came immediately after. "And because when he opened the wrong crate, he found 6 girls chained inside." Jonah stared at her. No dramatics in her voice. No embellishment. Just a fact she had repeated enough times to stop sounding shocked by it. Downstairs, footsteps entered the hall. One man only. Careful. Slow. The man outside wasn't bringing a team. He didn't need one. Shadow barked once, then back from the bedroom door, and looked at Jonah as if asking permission to break someone. Jonah's whole body had already shifted into something hard and old. Angles. Entry line. Cover. Distance to stairs. Window options. Bad options. Worse ones. He kept his voice low. "You said your father died hiding the case from my uncle." Eva nodded. "My father copied the records inside it before the fire. He hid the original and tried to disappear with me. Your uncle found him first." Jonah thought of Uncle Ray's expensive watches, easy lies, and the way grown men at his funeral kept scanning the room like they still expected him to walk in late and collect what he was owed. "Why keep the case here?" he asked. "Because your uncle used your name as insurance." Jonah frowned. "What?" Eva's eyes flicked to the hallway. "If anyone came for the house before he could retrieve it, the alarm would bring them all to the same place, you, the buyer, and anyone still looking for the evidence. He wanted whoever survived to lead him to the next piece." Buyer? So the man downstairs was not the law. Not the helper. Not a rescuer. He was part of the chain. That fit the tone too well. A floorboard creaked outside the bedroom. Shadow dropped lower. The man had reached the upstairs landing. Jonah motioned Eva back toward the window. Can you run? She gave a broken smile. I've been running for 5 years. He almost nodded. Then Shadow did something he had not done once all night. He backed away from the door. Away. Not toward the intruder. Away from it. Jonah caught it instantly. A beat later he saw why. A tiny red light rolled under the gap beneath the bedroom door and came to rest against the far wall. Not a laser dot. A device. No ticking. No blinking. Just one steady red eye. Gas canister? Flashbang? Microcharge? Jonah had already made the decision before fully identifying it. He shoved Eva down behind the bed frame and threw himself over Shadow as the device hissed. Gas. Not smoke. Not tear gas exactly. Something sweeter, sharper, faster. The same kind of tactical sedative blend he had once seen used in maritime interdictions where hostages mattered, and the people breathing it in didn't. Eva coughed once and tried not to panic. He wants us alive. That doesn't mean safe. Jonah ripped the comforter off the bed, jammed it under the door seam, and smashed the window with the butt of his pistol. Cold, wet night air rushed into the room. Shadow bounded up at once, coughing but functional. The footsteps outside the room didn't hurry. That was worse. The man in the hall knew the gas would work unless Jonah changed the geometry. A calm voice came through the door. You're making this more painful than it needs to be. Jonah knew that voice now. The same man from outside. Closer. Smiling through the words. He said nothing. The man continued. Leave the girl. Leave the case. Walk out the window, and I won't follow. Eva looked at Jonah with naked disbelief. He's lying. Obviously. The man on the other side of the door laughed softly. You'd be surprised how often fear makes obvious things negotiable. Shadow barked at the window. Not outside the room. At the alley below. Jonah crossed fast, swept the pistol down through the rain-streaked dark, and saw another car pulling up behind the house. Black sedan. Lights off. Engine low. 2 men getting out. So the first intruder had backup after all. Eva saw it in his face. What? We just lost the window. The room shrank. Gas thickened near the floor. Men below the window. 1 man in the hall. A case that had already gotten people killed. Jonah thought fast and looked around the room with the kind of attention that only happens when panic is no longer an option. Narrow closet. Shared wall. Old floor vent. Dresser too heavy. Bed frame metal. Wallpaper peeling near the baseboard beside the radiator. Peeling. Shadow was already there, scratching at the wall below the window exactly where the wallpaper had lifted. Jonah's pulse sharpened. Another wall. Another hidden section. He tore the paper back. Behind it was not plaster. Plywood paneling newer than the rest. A concealed repair. Or a passage sealed badly in a hurry. Eva stared. What is that? Jonah shoved the dresser sideways enough to clear the edge and found a recessed finger groove hidden beneath the trim. He pulled. The panel swung inward. Cold black space waited beyond it, narrow stairs dropping between the walls of the house. A servant passage. Old row house architecture. Hidden, forgotten, perfect. Shadow barked once into the dark and then looked back at Jonah with hard, furious certainty. This was the way. From the hall, the man finally stopped pretending patience. The doorknob turned once. Then a voice, flat now, no warmth left in it at all. Last chance, Jonah. Jonah shoved the steel case into Eva's hands, motioned her toward the hidden stairs, and stepped back to cover the door. Then he said, loud enough for the man outside to hear through gas, wood, and rain, If you want it, come earn it. And the bedroom door blew inward. The bedroom door blew inward with a splintering crack. The frame tore sideways under the force of the breach, and a wave of sweet chemical gas rolled into the room as a dark figure came low through the opening with a compact shield in one hand and a pistol in the other. He moved fast, but not blind. He had expected resistance. He had expected panic. He had not expected the room to be empty where the bed should have shielded them. Jonah fired first. The round slammed into the edge of the shield and threw sparks across the wallpaper. Shadow launched on the same heartbeat, a black streak through gas and dust, not at the shield, but at the man's gun arm. The intruder twisted just in time. The pistol fired wild into the ceiling. Plaster burst down in chunks. "Go!" Jonah shouted. Eva vanished into the hidden stairwell, clutching the steel case to her chest. Jonah stepped backward after her, firing once more through the doorway to force the man down behind the shield. Shadow disengaged on command and came back in a blur, coughing from the gas but still moving. Jonah slammed the concealed panel shut from inside the wall, just as two more shots punched through the bedroom plaster where his head had been. Darkness swallowed them. Not complete darkness. A weak gray ribbon of rainlight filtered down through cracks in old wood above, just enough to reveal a narrow hidden staircase dropping steeply between brick and lath. Dust hung in the air. The whole passage smelled like old timber, damp mortar, mouse nests, and secrets too old to still be breathing. Eva was already 3 steps below him. Too fast. No hesitation. No fumbling. She knew how to run inside buildings built with exits no one else remembered. Jonah caught that instantly and filed it away for later. The girl wasn't just hunted. She was trained by survival. Shadow pressed against Jonah's leg, eyes burning in the dimness, ears angled toward the bedroom they had just left. The dog wanted to go back. Wanted to fight. Wanted the clean answer of teeth and force. Jonah wanted that too. Instead he moved down. Behind the panel, the intruder hit the bedroom wall hard enough to shake dust down the stairwell. A second man entered the room above. Jonah heard boots, short commands, the scrape of furniture being shoved aside. They would find the hidden panel. Maybe not in 10 seconds. But soon. "Keep moving," Jonah whispered. Eva didn't answer. She moved fast, one hand sliding along the rail, the other wrapped around the case so tightly her knuckles flashed pale even in the dark. They descended one landing, then another, until the hidden stairs ended behind a rotted service door opening into the back storage room off the kitchen. Jonah eased the door open. The lower floor was dark except for rainlight leaking in through the broken front windows, and the faint blinking red from the torn alarm box still hanging beneath the hall table. The whole house felt stretched now, every room listening. Somewhere upstairs the men were still tearing through the bedroom. Somewhere outside, the sedan engine idled low in the alley. Shadow growled toward the kitchen entry. Jonah followed his line, and saw movement at the back door window. A silhouette. One of the men from the alley had come around the house, and taken the rear angle already. That fast. He shut the service door quietly, and turned to Eva. "How many people know about these stairs?" She swallowed. "My father did." "Your uncle?" "I don't know." That answer mattered too. Jonah listened hard. Upstairs search. Front hall quiet. Back kitchen compromised. Alley cut off. They needed distance inside the house before all 3 angles converged. "Basement?" he whispered. Eva nodded once, then hesitated. "Say it! There's another hidden door down there." Jonah almost laughed from pure exhaustion and disbelief, but there was no room left for either. "Of course there is." Shadow suddenly barked at the floor. Not the basement door. The hallway. Jonah cracked the service room door again and saw the alarm box's red light shift from solid to rapid blink. The front entry team had triggered a second phase. Whatever system Uncle Ray had hidden in this house wasn't just an alert, it was a timed handoff. Someone had built the house to hold the case in place just long enough for the wrong hands to close around it. A voice drifted up from the front hall. The same calm man from before. "Jonah, you're running out of house." Closer now. He had made it upstairs, found the hidden panel, realized they went down, and moved faster than Jonah liked. The voice continued, "If the girl told you the truth, then you know I'm not your enemy." Eva went rigid. Jonah saw that too. He turned to her. "You know him." She shook her head, but too late. Too hard. The lie showed before it formed. Shadow barked once at her, not aggressive, just sharp. She closed her eyes. "I know what he is." Jonah waited. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "His name is Owen Pike. He used to collect people for the transfers before he started buying them." The words settled cold. "Buying?" She nodded, breathing harder now. "Girls. Witnesses. Any record that could be traded before it was buried." Jonah's grip tightened on the pistol. From the hall, Pike called again, this time with no patience left in the sound. "The men outside work for buyers, not me. If they get the case before I do, you lose whatever chance the girl thinks she has." That was an interesting choice of words. Not the truth. Not justice. A chance. He wanted leverage, not morality. Jonah stepped fully back into the storage room and pointed toward the basement hatch. "Move!" They crossed the cramped room in silence broken only by rain and the soft thud of Shadow's paws on old floorboards. The basement door sat behind a rack of warped shelves and hanging paint cloths. Jonah pulled it open, and cold air breathed up from below carrying mildew, rust, and the sour scent of old furnace stone. Eva stopped on the top step. Not because of fear. Because her eyes had gone to the steel case in her hands. "Jonah!" He looked at her. The girl was pale now. Not from gas. Not from running. From decision. "If we go down there," she said, "I need you to know something before you open it." He stared at her for half a second. Then Shadow whipped around and barked at the service room door, just as the knob on the other side began to turn. Too late. Jonah shoved Eva down the first 3 steps and slammed the basement door shut above them. The latch caught just as a shoulder hit the other side. What boomed? Shadow stood on the landing above them, teeth bared, growling into the crack beneath the door like he meant to hold the whole house shut if asked. Jonah backed down 2 more steps and aimed at the frame. "Talk!" Eva clutched the case tighter. The darkness below made her look even younger, and even more worn out at the same time. "My father didn't just copy evidence from the case." Another slam hit the basement door. Dust burst from the hinges. Jonah kept the pistol steady. "Then what?" Eva's mouth trembled once before she forced the words out. "He changed it." The room seemed to get smaller. "Changed what?" "The contents. The original drive is gone." Shadow barked again as the men above started working metal into the latch seam. Jonah felt a cold wave move through him. "Then what's in the case?" Eva looked down at it, then back up at him with the kind of grief only truth can produce. "My father put something else inside after the fire," she whispered. "Something Uncle Ray could never be allowed to sell." A sharp metallic snap came from the basement door. The latch had started to split. Jonah took 1 step lower, forcing both of them deeper into the dark. "Say it clearly." Eva's eyes filled. Then she said the one thing that turned the whole night from a chase into an emotional wound with a pulse. "It's not just evidence in there," she said. "It's my little sister." For one terrible second Jonah thought she meant metaphor. A recording. A photograph. A birth certificate. Some proof of life hidden in data. Then the steel case moved in her arms. Not much. Just once. A small, unmistakable thump from inside. Jonah did not move for half a second. The steel case shifted again in Eva's arms, small, but undeniable. Not a loose part. Not a tool rolling inside foam. A living movement. A second after that came a thin muffled sound from inside the metal shell, so faint Jonah almost thought the house had made it. Then Shadow heard it too. The German shepherd's whole body changed. The dog stopped barking at the basement door and swung back toward Eva, ears high, head tilted, the way he used to react when a hostage made the smallest sound from behind a wall. Not threat. Not confusion. Life. The basement door above them shuddered under another impact. The latch screamed. Dust dropped from the frame. Someone outside the door shouted to someone else upstairs, but the old furnace and storm noise blurred the words into hard, urgent pieces. Jonah kept the pistol up, but his mind had already split into two tracks. 1. The door was going to fail soon. 2. The case had something alive in it. "Open it," he said. Eva backed down one more step, still clutching the case. "If I open it wrong, she stops breathing." That froze him. "Who is she?" "My sister." Eva's voice cracked, but only once. "Her name is Lily. She's 7. Jonah stared at the case. 7 years old did not fit inside something the size of a lunch box. Eva saw the disbelief and shook her head hard. "It folds." The door above boomed again. Shadow barked once toward the stairs, then ran back to Eva and planted himself so close to her knees that she nearly stumbled. The dog was doing what he always did when panic tried to get ahead of decision, forcing the human body to stay present. "Talk while you move," Jonah said. He drove them off the stairwell and deeper into the basement, past the old furnace and a rusted washer toward the far coal room where the walls narrowed and the floor dropped by one cracked concrete step. Better cover. Worse air. But it bought angle. Eva set the case on an overturned crate and wiped rainwater and sweat from her hands onto her jeans. "My father used Medivac transport shells," she said fast. "Infant trauma carriers, field collapse units, old tactical extraction pods, whatever he could steal, trade, or rebuild. After the fire, he turned one into this." Jonah crouched beside her. Now that he saw it close and under clearer light from the bare basement bulb, the steel shell made more sense. The outer casing was compact, but the seams were layered, not simple. Telescoping plates. Pressure latches. Vent ports almost invisible near the corners. This wasn't a document case. It was a transport cocoon. And inside it, something small hit the wall once more. A tiny fist. A knee. A scared child trying not to make noise. Jonah's mouth went dry. "Why hide her like this?" he asked. Eva's eyes lifted to his only long enough to let him see how exhausted the answer made her. "Because if men like Owen Pike find paper, they steal paper. If they find cash, they steal cash. If they find a child who can identify buyers, handlers, routes, and houses." She swallowed hard. "They don't steal her. They erase her." Shadow growled at the basement door. A hinge gave with a sharp crack. No more than a minute. Maybe less. Eva pulled a flat metal key from inside her shirt and slotted it into a recessed port on the case. "Help me when I say," she whispered. Jonah holstered the pistol just long enough to brace the shell. The mechanism released in stages. First a hiss. Then 2 side latches snapping outward. Then the top plates rising half an inch under their own pressure, as if the case were unfolding from memory. Eva lifted carefully, and the lunchbox shape became something longer, deeper, a narrow emergency pod wrapped in insulated canvas and foil lining. Warm air breathed out. Then Jonah saw her. A little girl lay curled inside the expanded cocoon under a web of straps and thermal blankets, smaller than 7, because illness and starvation had stolen too much of her size. Dark hair damp against her forehead. Oxygen cannula taped under her nose. One hand fisted around a strip of faded pink cloth. Eyes open wide in the low light, too alert for a child who had clearly been trained to stay silent when hidden. She looked first at Eva, then at Shadow. The second she saw the dog, her whole face changed. "Shadow," she whispered. The dog made a sound Jonah had not heard in years, a soft, broken, almost parental whine, and shoved his head gently into the side of the pod until the little girl touched him with trembling fingers. That hit Jonah harder than the case had moving. The dog knew her. Not from tonight. Not from scent carried by Eva. Knew her. "How?" Jonah asked. Eva didn't look up from unfastening the straps. "My father used to bring him when he checked safe houses. Only when he trusted the place. Only when he thought we'd be alone." Jonah's pulse sharpened. "My uncle knew your father?" Eva nodded once. "Better than he should have." The basement door split. Wood tore. A slice of hallway light cut down the stairwell. A man's shoulder hit the gap and vanished back. Shadow barked viciously and moved off the pod at once, taking position between the coal room and the stairs. Jonah grabbed the pistol again. "Can she walk?" Eva hesitated. That was answer enough. Lily saved her from saying it. "No," the little girl whispered. "Not fast." Jonah looked closer and saw the braces under the blanket, thin support strapped along both calves, recent bruising near one ankle, one shoe specially built thicker than the other. Not born weakness, he guessed. Injury. Damage. Or worse. "Where's the drive?" he asked. Eva froze. Not because she didn't want to answer. Because she had hoped not to. Lily turned her face away. Jonah caught that too. The child knew. He felt the room tighten around that realization. "It's with her," Eva said finally. "How?" Eva's eyes filled with shame and fury in equal measure. "My father burned the original files after copying them. Then he encrypted the buyer list, the transport routes, and the witness names onto a medical wafer small enough to hide where no one would search without admitting what they were." Jonah's blood turned cold. He looked at Lily, then at Eva, then back at the child. "No," Eva nodded. "They put it inside her during surgery after the fire," she said. "Lower rib cavity. Protected from scans unless you know what density you're looking for. Her scar looks like childhood trauma repair unless the right doctor opens her." The house above them went dead silent. That was worse than the pounding. Jonah knew silence like that. The men outside the basement door had stopped forcing entry because they were changing methods. Owen Pike's voice drifted down the stairs, calm and clear. "You should tell him the rest, Eva." Shadow snarled so hard his paws slid on the concrete. Eva went white. Pike continued. "Tell him why your father chose her. Tell him why your uncle couldn't sell the drive without the child." Jonah kept the pistol aimed at the stairwell, but looked at Eva. "What rest?" Eva didn't answer fast enough. Lily did. The little girl looked up at Jonah from inside the pod, eyes huge and far too old, and whispered the words like she'd been carrying them in secret for years. "Because the names aren't just in me," she said. "They're mine." For one hard second Jonah didn't understand. Then he did. Not a buyer list alone. Not external evidence alone. The child herself was on the list. No, worse than that. She was the missing link. A witness, a victim, and a record all at once. Pike's voice came again from the stairs, quieter now, almost gentle in the way men become when they think softness will help them cut deeper. "She isn't Eva's sister by blood, Jonah." Eva shut her eyes. Jonah felt the air leave the room. Pike let the silence work before he finished. "She's your Uncle Ray's daughter. And from the other side of the furnace room wall, hidden somewhere in the old brick where no sound should have come from at all, a second child began crying. The second child's crying did not come from upstairs. It came from inside the wall behind the old furnace, thin, frightened, and close enough to turn every hair on Jonah's arms cold. Shadow spun away from the basement door and bolted to the brickwork beside the rusted boiler. He didn't bark at the whole wall. He barked at one so dark brick low near the floor, then scratched once and looked back at Jonah with the same furious urgency he had shown in the hallway upstairs. Another hidden panel. Another trap. Another secret Uncle Ray had buried inside this house. Eva stared at the furnace wall, face draining of color. "No!" Jonah's pistol shifted from the stairwell to the brick. "You knew!" She shook her head too fast. "Not this one. I swear." Upstairs, Owen Pike's footsteps stopped halfway down the basement stairs. He had heard the crying too. His voice came through the dark calm and almost kind, which made it worse. "See, Jonah? Your uncle was keeping inventory." Shadow barked so hard spit hit the furnace door. Jonah holstered the pistol just long enough to seize the loose brick and wrench it sideways. It resisted for 1 second, then slid free in a puff of black soot. Behind it sat a rusted metal latch. He pulled. A narrow section of furnace wall cracked open inward. Cold stale air rolled out, carrying dust, damp coal, and the sour trap smell of a child who had spent too long in a place never meant for breathing. Inside was a cramped cavity no bigger than a crawl crate, lined with old insulation and blankets. Curled in the corner was a boy of maybe 6, skin gray with dust, eyes huge in the dark, hands bound with zip ties he had half chewed through. The second he saw Eva, he made one broken sound. "Evie!" She dropped to her knees. Not careful. Not tactical. Just gone in one violent collapse of fear and relief. "Milo!" So that was the truth. Lily in the steel pod. Milo in the wall. 2 children hidden in 2 different ways, because one house full of lies had needed more than one contingency. Jonah cut Milo's bindings with his multi-tool, while Shadow pressed against the boy's shoulder and licked soot from his cheek like he was trying to prove he was real. The child clung to the dog's fur with both hands, shaking too hard to speak again. Pike's voice drifted down the stairs. "There are 3 buyers waiting on your block tonight, Jonah. Do you know why? Because Ray promised them choices." Jonah looked up at the stairwell. He could see nothing yet, but the voice was closer now. "What choices?" Pike laughed once. "The witness, the bloodline, or the ledger." Eva went still. Jonah heard that and hated how much it mattered. "What bloodline?" Eva didn't answer. Lily did from inside the half-open pod, voice small and worn out and too clear. "Milo's my brother." Jonah turned to her. Lily's eyes had gone glassy, not from confusion, but from the kind of truth children learn too young. "We have the same father," she whispered. "Not Eva's." The room got tighter. Ray hadn't just hidden evidence in his house. He had hidden children tied to the crime itself, one by blood, one by witness, both valuable to the wrong men for different reasons. Shadow barked at the basement stairs. Pike had started down again. No more conversation. No more time. Jonah looked at the old furnace door, the hidden cavity, the pod, the narrow coal room, and forced his brain past shock. Old row houses were built with ash chutes, coal hatches, service passages. Houses like this always had one more hole than honest families knew about. He grabbed Eva's shoulders. "Your father ever mention a basement exit?" Her breathing hitched once. Then she nodded. "Behind the ash pit. But he said it was collapsed." "Show me." Milo was too weak to stand well. Jonah lifted him with one arm and pushed Lily's pod handle into Eva's hands with the other. The pod was awkward but lighter once expanded, designed to roll over flat ground if there were wheels beneath. There weren't. Shadow moved ahead, already searching, nose low, barking at the furnace base again, and then the wall behind it. Of course. The dog had seen the path before the humans did. Jonah kicked aside a stack of coal buckets and exposed a square iron clean-out hatch in the floor behind the furnace. Fresh scrape marks edged the rust. Someone had used it recently. Pike's boots hit the final basement step. "Jonah," he called. "Last offer. Hand me Lily, and I let the rest of you disappear." Jonah almost answered. Then Shadow barked toward the stairs and backed up. Not attack. Distance. That made Jonah look lower. A small cylinder rolled off the basement step and clinked across the concrete toward them. Gas. He grabbed Eva by the jacket and ripped her and the pod sideways as the canister began hissing a sweet white fog into the basement. Shadow snatched the can in his jaws, whipped his head once, and flung it back toward the stairs just before it fully vented. Pike cursed above the sudden cloud. Jonah yanked the clean-out hatch open. Below it was not collapse. It was a slanted brick chute dropping into darkness, wide enough for one adult on hands and knees or a child and a dog together. Cold night air seeped up from below. An exit. "Go!" Jonah snapped. Eva shoved the pod toward the opening first, then froze when she looked back at the stairs. "Pike! Leave him to me." "No!" That one word carried years. Jonah met her eyes, and saw it plainly then. She had spent too long running to trust any plan that required leaving danger at her back. He understood. He also understood the basement was about to become impossible. Shadow solved it. He ran at Eva, hit her knee hard enough to break her balance, then immediately spun and barked down the chute. "Move. Now." Eva caught herself, stared at the dog, and then did what the dog asked. She lowered Lily's pod into the chute and shoved it ahead. Milo clung to Jonah until Jonah physically put him into the darkness after it. The boy went with one last terrified look back toward the stairs. Jonah was about to follow when Pike finally came through the gas. Not blindly. Not coughing. Wearing a respirator half-mask and holding a compact pistol in one hand and a taser in the other. He saw the open clean-out and stopped dead. Then his eyes found Milo disappearing into the dark. Everything soft vanished from his face. "Milo stays!" Jonah fired. Pike moved faster than Jonah liked, and the round shattered brick beside his shoulder. Pike's taser cracked blue. Jonah twisted, and the probes missed his chest, but one clipped his left side and skittered away. Shadow hit Pike low before the second trigger pull. Man and dog slammed into the basement shelves and set jars and tools raining across the floor. "Go!" Jonah shouted again. Eva shouldered the pod deeper into the chute, then looked back one last time. That was when Jonah saw the second man behind Pike. Not from the stairs. From the laundry alcove. One of the alley men had come in through the service room and circled low. He raised his weapon toward the clean-out. Jonah threw himself sideways into the shot line. The round hit his shoulder and spun him into the furnace. White pain burst through his arm. Shadow tore into Pike's forearm. Pike screamed and slammed the dog into the concrete. The second man lunged for the clean-out hatch. Eva did not run. She came back. She grabbed the heavy iron hatch with both hands and brought it down on the second man's wrist. Bone cracked. The pistol dropped. Jonah kicked it away and drove his boot into the man's knee, sending him howling into the gas. "Eva, go!" She shook her head wildly. "Not without you!" Pike had one hand free now, and it was a small black remote. Jonah saw it. Shadow saw it. Too late. Pike hit the trigger. A sharp metallic slam echoed from somewhere inside the chute below them. Eva froze. The sound came again. Closer, final. A gate had dropped in the tunnel. Her face emptied. No! She turned and dove into the clean-out anyway, disappearing into the dark before Jonah could stop her. Bad. Very bad. Because if a gate had dropped, the chute was now a trap. Shadow ripped free of Pike and bounded for the opening after her, but Jonah caught his harness with his good hand just in time. Pike used the second it bought him. He drove the taser into Jonah's thigh and triggered it. The world exploded. Jonah hit the floor hard, teeth slamming together, every muscle locking in electric fire. Shadow went wild. Pike kicked the dog off and crawled for the clean-out, but the basement door above burst open at that exact second, and new voices flooded in from the house. Not Pike's men. Police. Commands. Real ones. Loud, chaotic, uncoordinated, in the way of local responders arriving too late to understand the map of the violence they'd entered. Pike heard them and changed instantly. He no longer wanted the basement. He wanted escape. He rolled through the gas toward the laundry alcove, leaving Jonah half paralyzed on the floor and Shadow barking himself raw beside the open clean-out. Jonah dragged himself to the chute on one elbow and looked down. The pod light glowed faint red below. The tunnel bit left out of sight. And halfway down, a steel grate had indeed crashed across the passage. Lily and Milo were trapped on the far side. Eva was on the near side. And as Jonah watched, coughing in the dark below, she looked back up at him through the bars with terror all over her face and shouted the two words that made failure total. He took her! Then the pod light vanished deeper in the tunnel. Jonah forced air back into his lungs, one broken breath at a time. The taser hit had left his muscles shaking and his left shoulder screaming from the gunshot crease. But the words Eva had shouted through the grate cut through all of it. He took her. Shadow was already halfway into the clean-out chute, barking so hard the sound ricocheted off the brick like a trapped alarm. Upstairs, real police voices were flooding the house now. Too many boots, too many commands, too late to mean safety. Pike had used the chaos exactly the way a smart man used weather, not to stop anyone, just to blur who belonged and who didn't. Jonah dragged himself to the tunnel opening and dropped in after the dog. The chute was narrow, brick-lined, and slick with years of soot and runoff. 10 feet down it leveled into the cramped service tunnel where the steel grate had dropped. Eva was on her knees at the bars, both hands wrapped around them, shaking the metal until her palms bled. On the far side, Milo stood barefoot in ankle-deep water, crying hard now, one hand stretched toward the darkness, where the pod light had disappeared. "Which way?" Jonah snapped. Eva pointed with a trembling hand. "Left bend. There's another chamber down there." Shadow barked into the dark bend, then ran back to the grate and pawed hard at the tunnel wall beside it. Not the bars. The wall. Jonah saw it immediately. One section of brickwork was cleaner than the rest. One single brick sat half a shade darker, where moisture hadn't aged it the same way. Hidden mechanism. Again. Of course. He shoved his fingers into the mortar seam, found a recessed lip, and yanked. The brick came free. Behind it sat a rusted lever. Jonah pulled. Somewhere beneath the tunnel floor, old metal groaned. A narrow maintenance slit opened beside the grate, barely shoulder width, a bypass channel hidden inside the wall. Enough for a man to crawl. Enough for a dog to move fast. Rex, no Shadow, didn't wait for permission. The shepherd dove through the gap and vanished into the dark. "Stay with me," Jonah muttered and followed. The passage twisted tighter than the clean-out chute, forcing him onto one shoulder with brick scraping his back and water soaking through his shirt. Ahead of him, Eva crawled fast despite shaking hands. Behind them, Milo cried Jonah's name once, then Shadow barked again farther ahead, telling them he had already found something. The tunnel opened into a low coal corridor running beneath the alley behind the house. Jonah rose into a crouch, pistol up, lungs burning. The air down here was colder, cleaner than the basement, carrying engine exhaust, wet earth, and something that made his whole body tighten before his mind caught up. Cigar smoke. Uncle Ray used to smoke cheap cigars on the back porch when Jonah was 14, leaning against the railing like he owned every silence around him. Jonah hadn't smelled that exactly sour brand since the funeral. Eva saw the change in his face. What? He didn't answer, because the smell itself was an answer. The pod light glowed faint red around the next bend. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent. Jonah killed his flashlight and eased to the corner. A larger chamber lay beyond, an old coal delivery room converted into something cleaner and far more deliberate. Bare bulb overhead. Folding table. Medical cooler. 2 duffel bags. Another hidden door set into the far wall. And beside Lily's expanded pod, one hand resting almost gently on the lid, stood a man in a charcoal overcoat. Alive. Not memory. Not resemblance. Not some stranger borrowing posture. Ray Mercer. Jonah's uncle. The same face from the funeral photo, only thinner now, cleaner around the eyes, less swollen from age than it had looked in the coffin. Because, of course, the coffin had never held him. Of course, Uncle Ray had staged his own death the way other men changed addresses. Jonah went cold in a way anger couldn't touch. Eva saw him too, and stopped breathing for a second. Ray looked up from the pod before either of them made a sound, and smiled. Not surprised. Not scared. Relieved. I told Owen the dog would sort the timing out, he said. You always did trust animals faster than people, Jonah. The chamber tilted. Not because Ray was alive. Because of how calm he was about it. As if this had never been a chase. Just a delayed meeting. Shadow stepped into the opening before Jonah could stop him and bared his teeth. The shepherd did not rush Ray. He stood rigid between Jonah and the pod, barking once, furious and wounded, as if even the dog understood betrayal had a scent. Ray looked at the dog, and something almost warm crossed his face. Still alive. Good. Then his gaze lifted to Jonah. You came up harder than I expected. Jonah's voice came out flat. You were in a casket. Ray shrugged. You'd be shocked what grief lets people avoid looking at closely. Eva made a sound in her throat that was half rage, half disbelief. My father died because of you. Ray didn't deny it. That was the part that made him monstrous. He simply adjusted the blanket over the pod, careful not to wake Lily, and said, Your father died because he wanted to be a hero after years of being useful. Jonah took one step into the room, pistol trained center chest. Move away from the pod. Ray looked almost offended. If I wanted the child harmed, you wouldn't have reached the basement in time. That sentence slammed into Jonah harder than the sight of him alive had. Every alarm. Every timing choice. The staged urgency. The fake death. The house itself. Not chaos. Architecture. Ray had designed the night. You used me, Jonah said. Ray's smile thinned. I used what was available. Eva went for him. Not with a gun. Not with a plan. With bare hands and 5 years of grief. She lunged across the wet floor with a raw scream, and would have hit him if Shadow hadn't cut sideways and blocked her path, barking hard enough to stop her dead. Not protecting Ray. Protecting the room from becoming chaos around the pod. Ray didn't even step back. He just watched Eva the way men watch storms from behind glass. You still waste motion when you're emotional. Your father hated that. Jonah wanted to shoot him right there. Ray saw it. Of course he did. Go ahead, he said softly. Then watch the pod lock shut again. Jonah's finger tightened. Ray tapped a small remote in his left hand. There it was. Another layer. If my pulse drops, Ray went on, the pod seals and the airway timer cuts. Your sister's clever little modifications won't matter after that. Eva went white. Jonah's mind ran hard and fast. PulseLink Deadman remote. Pod is hostage. Ray exposed but in control. Shadow unwilling to rush because the dog could smell the stakes even if he couldn't name them. Jonah glanced at Lily. The little girl was awake again. Barely. Eyes open in the red glow of the pod, looking from Eva to Ray to Jonah with the exhausted awareness of a child who understood more than any child should. Then she said something that changed the room. Don't let him take Milo too. Jonah looked at Ray. Ray's smile faded for the first time. Not because Lily had spoken. Because she had used the wrong word. He had planned for Lily. Maybe for the case. Maybe even for Jonah. But Lily had just shown she understood Milo was part of whatever came next. And suddenly Jonah saw the shape of it. Ray hadn't staged his death to escape buyers. He had staged it to gather all the pieces, Lily, Milo, the records, and Jonah, into one place. One final sale. Or one final relocation. Or something worse than either. Jonah's voice dropped. Why both kids? Ray's eyes shifted past him toward the tunnel where Milo still waited on the far side of the grate. Then, very slowly, he looked back at Jonah. The silence stretched. Then he said, with no warmth left in him at all, because one child proves the crimes. 2 children prove the bloodline. Jonah felt the sentence hit before he understood it. Eva did too. Her face emptied. Ray saw it and decided to finish the cut. Tell him, he said to her. Or I will. Eva shook her head once, tiny, broken. Ray's voice stayed calm. Milo and Lily aren't just evidence, Jonah. He lifted the remote slightly. They're heirs. And behind the hidden door, at the far end of the chamber, heavy locks began to turn. The locks behind the hidden door turned one by one. Heavy. Deliberate. Mechanical enough to make the whole chamber feel smaller with every click. Jonah did not take his eyes off Ray. Ray did not take his thumb off the remote. Eva had gone still, one hand already reaching behind her for Milo even before the hidden door fully opened. Shadow shifted his weight too, body low, chest rumbling, torn between the pod at Ray's side and the black seam widening in the far wall. Then the door swung inward. Not to a room. To a tunnel. A clean concrete service corridor lit by recessed white strips, dry underfoot, nothing like the soot-choked coal chamber they stood in. At the far end sat a black utility cart with 2 armed men beside it, and a third figure leaning against the wall with a respirator hanging loose around his neck. Owen Pike. Alive, unhurried, exactly where a man like him would be if the house above had only ever been theater. Eva made a sound in her throat and pulled Milo behind her. Ray smiled without warmth. See? I told you timing would sort itself out. Pike's eyes moved across the room. Jonah, Shadow, the pod, the children, the open case architecture of secrets finally cornered. You complicated the staircase, he said. Jonah's voice went flat. You keep saying things like I'm supposed to believe you belong in this room. Pike laughed once. Believe whatever helps you aim straight. Shadow barked so violently the walls kicked it back at them. That was the warning. Not Pike. Not Ray. The left side of the hidden doorway. Jonah shifted half an inch and caught it just as a red laser dot crawled across his ribs from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. Sniper angle. Close. Low. Hidden behind the second support column. Shadow hit him in the leg before the shot came. Jonah crashed sideways into the brick floor as the round tore through the space where his chest had been. Dust burst from the wall behind him. Eva screamed. Milo dropped flat on instinct. Lily's pod rocked once on the crate and gave off a soft internal alarm chirp. Everything detonated at once. Shadow launched not at Ray this time, but at the dark slice of tunnel where the laser had come from. A man shouted. A second shot went wide. Pike ducked behind the utility cart. Ray stepped back with the pod remote still in his hand, maddeningly calm even while bullets started punching chips from the old coal walls. "Don't damage the pod," he shouted. That told Jonah exactly where the real leverage still lived. He rolled behind the furnace brace, came up on one knee, and fired twice at Ray. Ray moved just enough. One round missed clean. The second shattered the remote from his hand. The plastic shell burst apart against the far wall. For one glorious half-second, Jonah thought the balance had changed. Then Lily's pod gave a sharp locking buzz, and the outer shell began sealing itself anyway. Failsafe. Of course. Eva saw it too and lunged for the pod. No! Pike came out of cover fast, not for Jonah, for Lily. He crossed half the chamber with startling speed, grabbed the pod handle, and dragged it toward the open tunnel. Jonah fired again, but one of the armed men shoved the cart into the line of fire, and the bullet buried itself in steel instead of Pike's spine. Milo ran. Not away. Toward the pod. The little boy hit Pike's leg with both fists and every scrap of fury he had. It was brave. It was useless. Pike kicked him off hard enough to send him sprawling into the soot. Eva screamed his name and went after him. Ray snatched her by the shoulder on the way past. Not you. That sentence hit wrong. Not now. Not there. Not you. Like she had a different use. Jonah saw it. So did Shadow. The dog came out of the tunnel shadows with blood on his muzzle and hit Ray from the side just as Ray tried to drag Eva backward. Ray lost his footing and slammed into the crate. The pod tipped. Pike cursed. One of the tunnel men brought his rifle down toward Shadow. Jonah shot him through the forearm. The rifle clattered away. The whole house shook. Not imagination. Not nerves. A deep boom rolled through the floor and up the brick walls, followed by the sharp pop-pop-pop of old timber catching flame. Upstairs, someone shouted. Another crash answered. Then came the unmistakable roar of fire finding air in a place built too dry and too old to resist it. The furnace line. A round or breech charge had opened something above. The house was burning now. Ray might save the roof for a minute. Maybe two. Not long enough. Smoke began curling through the ceiling vents almost immediately. Pike heard it and changed priorities in real time. Move the asset! Asset? Not child. Jonah's jaw locked. Lily's pod sealed with a final clunk, red status lights pulsing along the side. Through the small viewing strip, he saw her face in profile, eyes wide, tiny fists hammering once against the inside before the sedation mist or oxygen cycle changed. The pod chirped again. A countdown. The utility cart operator shouted. Auto support engaged. 12 minutes. 12 minutes until what? Jonah didn't need the rest. 12 minutes until air failure, or extraction lock, or some other system designed to make a child portable and obedient. Ray was back on his feet now, soot on his coat, blood at the corner of his mouth where Shadow had clipped him. But he was smiling again. Even now. Take the girl, he said to Pike. Leave the boy. Milo, still on the floor, heard that. So did Eva. And something in her face changed. Not fear. Not grief. Decision. She snatched the broken pod crate leg from the ground and swung it with both hands into Ray's knee. Bone cracked or wood did. Jonah couldn't tell which over the sudden roar of the fire venting somewhere above, but Ray went down hard enough to lose the smile. Shadow hit Pike on the same beat. This time the dog got him clean. Teeth in the shoulder. full weight. Fury. Pike went backward into the utility cart, and the pod handle slipped free from his grip. The cart rolled. One wheel caught in a floor crack. The sealed pod tilted toward the open tunnel. Jonah lunged. So did the last armed man. They hit the pod together from opposite sides just before it tipped over the threshold. Jonah drove his shoulder into the metal shell and shoved it back into the chamber. The armed man drew a knife, because the room had become too close for anything cleaner. Jonah trapped the wrist, twisted, felt cartilage tear, and drove the man face first into the brick. Milo scrambled to Eva. She wrapped an arm around him and pulled him behind the furnace base. Smoke thickened. The hidden tunnel remained the only route not yet burning. Of course it did. Ray saw Jonah understand that too. "You can still save one of them," he said, voice rough now, but steady. "Take the boy and run." Jonah stared at him. There it was. The shape of the trap. Not just physically. Morally. Choose. Reduce. Abandon one child in order to protect another. Men like Ray always built systems around the assumption that everyone eventually accepted a smaller evil to survive a larger one. Jonah had done that once. Daniel Cross buried under concrete because Jonah had chosen the wrong man to pull first. He had lived with that weight every day since. No. Not again. Shadow barked at the tunnel. Not retreat. Not escape. A new sound had risen under the fire and gun smoke. Sirens in the distance, yes, but closer than that, under the chamber itself, rushing water. The basement drains were backing up. The firefight, the rain, the broken lines above, everything was starting to flood downward. Pike tore free of Shadow's bite and slammed the dog into the tunnel wall hard enough to make Jonah's vision flare red. Shadow yelped, stumbled, then came back anyway, limping now, but still ready. Pike wiped blood from his shoulder and looked at Jonah with something like contempt. "You are running out of house, Seal." Jonah planted himself between both children and the tunnel. "Then come through me." Pike's eyes flicked to Ray. Ray looked at Eva. Not Lily. Not the pod. Eva. And for the first time, Jonah understood the hidden arithmetic of the room. Lily was transportable evidence. Milo was bloodline proof. Eva was the only surviving handler link between both. Ray didn't just need the children. He needed the witness who could authenticate them. Eva saw him realize it. She looked at Jonah once, then at the pod, then at Milo pressed against her side. And before he could stop her, she made the kind of decision only someone already ruined by survival can make. She shoved Milo toward Jonah and ran straight at Pike. Not to win. To break the room. Pike caught her by the throat with one hand. Shadow launched. Jonah moved. Ray bent for the fallen remote fragment, and the pod began rolling again toward the tunnel as flames broke through the ceiling above them, and the entire coal chamber floor split down the middle. The locks behind the hidden door turned one by one. Heavy. Deliberate. Mechanical enough to make the whole chamber feel smaller with every click. Jonah did not take his eyes off Ray. Ray did not take his thumb off the remote. Eva had gone still, one hand already reaching behind her for Milo even before the hidden door fully opened. Shadow shifted his weight too, body low, chest rumbling, torn between the pod at Ray's side and the black seam widening in the far wall. Then the door swung inward. Not to a room. To a tunnel. A clean concrete service corridor lit by recessed white strips, dry underfoot, nothing like the soot-choked coal chamber they stood in. At the far end sat a black utility cart with two armed men beside it, and a third figure leaning against the wall with a respirator hanging loose around his neck. Owen Pike. Alive, unhurried, exactly where a man like him would be if the house above had only ever been theater. Eva made a sound in her throat and pulled Milo behind her. Ray smiled without warmth. "See? I told you timing would sort itself out. Pike's eyes moved across the room. Jonah, Shadow, the pod, the children, the open case architecture of secrets finally cornered. You complicated the staircase, he said. Jonah's voice went flat. You keep saying things like I'm supposed to believe you belong in this room. Pike laughed once. Believe whatever helps you aim straight. Shadow barked so violently, the walls kicked it back at them. That was the warning. Not Pike. Not Ray. The left side of the hidden doorway. Jonah shifted half an inch and caught it just as a red laser dot crawled across his ribs from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. Sniper angle. Close. Low. Hidden behind the second support column. Shadow hit him in the leg before the shot came. Jonah crashed sideways into the brick floor as the round tore through the space where his chest had been. Dust burst from the wall behind him. Eva screamed. Milo dropped flat on instinct. Lily's pod rocked once on the crate and gave off a soft internal alarm chirp. Everything detonated at once. Shadow launched not at Ray this time, but at the dark slice of tunnel where the laser had come from. A man shouted. A second shot went wide. Pike ducked behind the utility cart. Ray stepped back with the pod remote still in his hand, maddeningly calm even while bullets started punching chips from the old coal walls. Don't damage the pod, he shouted. That told Jonah exactly where the real leverage still lived. He rolled behind the furnace brace, came up on one knee, and fired twice at Ray. Ray moved just enough. One round missed clean. The second shattered the remote from his hand. The plastic shell burst apart against the far wall. For one glorious half-second, Jonah thought the balance had changed. Then Lily's pod gave a sharp locking buzz, and the outer shell began sealing itself anyway. Failsafe. Of course. Eva saw it too and lunged for the pod. No! Pike came out of cover fast, not for Jonah, for Lily. He crossed half the chamber with startling speed, grabbed the pod handle, and dragged it toward the open tunnel. Jonah fired again, but one of the armed men shoved the cart into the line of fire, and the bullet buried itself in steel instead of Pike's spine. Milo ran. Not away. Toward the pod. The little boy hit Pike's leg with both fists and every scrap of fury he had. It was brave. It was useless. Pike kicked him off hard enough to send him sprawling into the soot. Eva screamed his name and went after him. Ray snatched her by the shoulder on the way past. Not you. That sentence hit wrong. Not now. Not there. Not you. Like she had a different use. Jonah saw it. So did Shadow. The dog came out of the tunnel shadows with blood on his muzzle and hit Ray from the side just as Ray tried to drag Eva backward. Ray lost his footing and slammed into the crate. The pod tipped. Pike cursed. One of the tunnel men brought his rifle down toward Shadow. Jonah shot him through the forearm. The rifle clattered away. The whole house shook. Not imagination. Not nerves. A deep boom rolled through the floor and up the brick walls, followed by the sharp pop-pop-pop of old timber catching flame. Upstairs, someone shouted. Another crash answered. Then came the unmistakable roar of fire finding air in a place built too dry and too old to resist it. The furnace line. A round or breech charge had opened something above. The house was burning now. Rain might save the roof for a minute. Maybe two. Not long enough. Smoke began curling through the ceiling vents almost immediately. Pike heard it and changed priorities in real time. Move the asset! Asset? Not child. Jonah's jaw locked. Lily's pod sealed with a final clunk, red status lights pulsing along the side. Through the small viewing strip, he saw her face in profile, eyes wide, tiny fists hammering once against the inside before the sedation mist or oxygen cycle changed. The pod chirped again. A countdown. The utility cart operator shouted. Auto support engaged. 12 minutes. 12 minutes until what? Jonah didn't need the rest. 12 minutes until air failure, or extraction lock, or some other system designed to make a child portable and obedient. Ray was back on his feet now, soot on his coat, blood at the corner of his mouth where Shadow had clipped him. But he was smiling again, even now. Take the girl, he said to Pike. Leave the boy. Milo, still on the floor, heard that. So did Eva. And something in her face changed. Not fear. Not grief. Decision. She snatched the broken pod crate leg from the ground and swung it with both hands into Ray's knee. Bone cracked or wood did. Jonah couldn't tell which over the sudden roar of the fire venting somewhere above, but Ray went down hard enough to lose the smile. Shadow hit Pike on the same beat. This time the dog got him clean. Teeth in the shoulder. Full weight. Fury. Pike went backward into the utility cart, and the pod handle slipped free from his grip. The cart rolled. One wheel caught in a floor crack. The sealed pod tilted toward the open tunnel. Jonah lunged. So did the last armed man. They hit the pod together from opposite sides just before it tipped over the threshold. Jonah drove his shoulder into the metal shell and shoved it back into the chamber. The armed man drew a knife, because the room had become too close for anything cleaner. Jonah trapped the wrist, twisted, felt cartilage tear, and drove the man face first into the brick. Milo scrambled to Eva. She wrapped an arm around him and pulled him behind the furnace base. Smoke thickened. The hidden tunnel remained the only route not yet burning. Of course it did. Ray saw Jonah understand that too. You can still save one of them, he said, voice rough now, but steady. Take the boy and run. Jonah stared at him. There it was. The shape of the trap. Not just physically. Morally. Choose. Reduce. Abandon one child in order to protect another. Men like Ray always built systems around the assumption that everyone eventually accepted a smaller evil to survive a larger one. Jonah had done that once. Daniel Cross buried under concrete because Jonah had chosen the wrong man to pull first. He had lived with that weight every day since. No. Not again. Shadow barked at the tunnel. Not retreat. Not escape. A new sound had risen under the fire and gun smoke. Sirens in the distance, yes, but closer than that, under the chamber itself, rushing water. The basement drains were backing up. The firefight, the rain, the broken lines above, everything was starting to flood downward. Pike tore free of Shadow's bite and slammed the dog into the tunnel wall hard enough to make Jonah's vision flare red. Shadow yelped, stumbled, then came back anyway, limping now, but still ready. Pike wiped blood from his shoulder and looked at Jonah with something like contempt. You are running out of house, Seal. Jonah planted himself between both children and the tunnel. Then come through me. Pike's eyes flicked to Ray. Ray looked at Eva. Not Lily. Not the pod. Eva. And for the first time, Jonah understood the hidden arithmetic of the room. Lily was transportable evidence. Milo was bloodline proof. Eva was the only surviving handler link between both. Ray didn't just need the children. He needed the witness who could authenticate them. Eva saw him realize it. She looked at Jonah once, then at the pod, then at Milo pressed against her side. And before he could stop her, she made the kind of decision only someone already ruined by survival can make. She shoved Milo toward Jonah and ran straight at Pike. Not to win. To break the room. Pike caught her by the throat with one hand. Shadow launched. Jonah moved. Ray bent for the fallen remote fragment, and the pod began rolling again toward the tunnel as flames broke through the ceiling above them, and the entire coal chamber floor split down the middle. The floor split with a sound like the house had finally lost patience. One violent crack ripped across the cold chamber from the furnace base to the hidden tunnel threshold, and the concrete under all of them dropped 3 inches before tearing open into blackness. Fire from the ceiling vented downward in orange sheets. Water from the burst basement lines rushed across the floor and vanished into the widening break. The pod carrying Lily rolled hard toward the tunnel. Milo screamed. Eva was still in Pike's grip. Everything happened too fast for thought. Shadow chose first. The German Shepherd hit Pike high in the ribs just as the man tightened his hand around Eva's throat. The impact drove them both sideways into the wall. Pike's pistol fired once into the ceiling. Burning plaster rained down. Eva fell free, coughing, and Jonah threw himself through the smoke toward Milo, while the steel pod bounced off a loose crate, spun, and started sliding nose first toward the crack in the floor. "Lily!" Eva shouted. Jonah grabbed Milo under one arm and turned. Ray was already moving for the pod. Of course he was. Not toward Eva. Not toward the boy. Straight toward the girl in the case, as if every lie, every fake death, every buried room in the house had only ever been built around that one destination. He hit the floor on his knees, reached for the pod handle, and got it, just as the concrete beneath him sheared away again. The chamber lurched. Ray slid. The pod stopped at the edge of the crack with half its weight hanging over darkness. Ray sprawled after it, one hand on the handle, one hand clawing for purchase on the broken floor. Firelight flashed across his face, and for the first time all night Jonah saw something that wasn't controlled there. Fear. Pike slammed Shadow into the tunnel wall again and came up bleeding, wild-eyed, angrier now that the room had stopped behaving like a plan. He saw Ray hanging over the split, and did the math instantly. The pod. The girl. The sail. Everything else could burn. He lunged for Ray. Jonah moved at the same time. Not for Ray. For the pod. He dropped Milo into Eva's arms, hit the floor on his stomach, and caught the pod's rear frame with both hands just as it started to tip. The weight nearly tore his shoulder apart. Metal bit into his palms. Beneath the small viewing strip, Lily's face flashed pale in the red light, eyes huge, one hand pounding at the inside. "Hold her!" Jonah roared. Eva got there first, sliding on both knees through soot and water, grabbing the side rail opposite him. Shadow tore free from Pike with a vicious twist, spun, and hit the man low again. Pike lost balance and skidded straight into Ray. All 3 men collided at the edge. Ray screamed as Pike's shoulder slammed into his side. The pod jerked. Jonah's grip slipped 1 inch. Eva cried out and tightened hers so hard her arm shook. The crack in the floor widened another inch with a deep grinding pop. Below them, something old and empty boomed in the dark, an old coal chute or storage shaft exposed by the collapse. "Jonah!" Eva shouted. "It's going!" He knew. He also knew there was no way to save all of it clean. Ray saw that too. Through smoke, fire, and the red emergency pulse from the pod, his uncle looked straight at him and laughed once through clenched teeth. Not because any of this was funny. Because he had spent too long believing the world always came down to one thing: choose which life to drop. "Take the boy," Ray gasped. "Leave the asset." Jonah felt the old wound open under that sentence. Daniel Cross under collapsed concrete. Wrong man first. Wrong second too late. Years of punishment. No. Not this time. Shadow solved it before Jonah could. The shepherd drove into Pike's knee with every ounce of weight he had left. Bone popped or something close to it. Pike lost his footing and disappeared into Ray. Both men slid into the widening break together. Ray's hand tore free of the pod handle. Pike clawed for the edge. One caught the other. Then the floor beneath them gave one final time. They vanished into the dark. The scream that came back up was cut short by the collapsing room. Jonah and Eva hauled the pod clear. The metal shell slammed against solid floor just as the last section of broken concrete where Ray had been hanging dropped away into the shaft below. A blast of cold underground air shot upward, carrying soot, damp coal, and something uglier. The smell of old rot opened too suddenly. For one stunned heartbeat, no one moved. Then the hidden tunnel started to burn. Not the whole thing. Just the frame first, where the fight and the muzzle flashes and the vented fire above had finally found dry old timber inside the walls. Flames crawled up the support beams with terrifying speed. The chamber became a furnace. "Out!" Jonah barked. Eva dragged Milo toward the tunnel. Jonah grabbed the pod handles. Shadow took position beside the sealed shell, shoving it with his shoulder every time the wheel frame caught on broken concrete. Together they forced it into the service corridor, just as the coal chamber behind them roared into full fire. The tunnel beyond was narrower than Jonah remembered from seconds ago, because panic made distance lie. Water rushed at their boots. Smoke rolled low from the chamber behind. The hidden passage bent twice, then opened into the old clean-out chute where they had first come down. Too tight to carry the pod normally. Too steep to push it blind. Milo coughed hard and sagged against Eva. Lily banged once from inside the shell. The pod timer chirped. Jonah's whole chest tightened. "What does that mean?" Eva looked at the side panel and went pale. "The oxygen cycle shifted." "How long?" She didn't answer immediately. That was enough. Shadow barked sharply at the wall beside the chute and scratched at a warped timber support under a rusted pipeline. Jonah hit it once with the butt of his pistol. Hollow. He hit it again. The panel cracked inward. Behind it was not brick. A narrow coal slide. Old, soot-black, and steep, but wide enough to send the pod down on its reinforced skids if they controlled the descent. The house gave a deep groan overhead. Fire had reached the first floor. Jonah looked at Eva. "Can you hold Milo and guide from below?" She nodded once. All the fear burned down into function now. They did it fast. Milo first into Eva's arms. Eva down the slide. Shadow after them with reckless speed. Then Jonah lowered the pod nose first into the chute, fighting the weight, while Shadow braced below and Eva guided from the dark with both hands. The steel shell shrieked against old boards, but held. Jonah followed last, half sliding, half falling, and hit the basement slab hard enough to jar his wounded shoulder white-hot. The basement was full of smoke now. Real sirens screamed outside. Louder than before. Closer. Multiple units. They crossed the furnace room in a blur and hit the back service door just as flames blew through the kitchen above. Jonah kicked the warped frame twice before it gave. Cold rain hammered into them. Alley air. Wet asphalt. Blessed outside. For one glorious second, it felt like survival. Police cruisers were skidding to a stop at both ends of the alley. Red-blue lights bounced across brick and puddles. Neighbors shouted behind fences. A fire engine rounded the corner, siren peaking. Uniformed officers spilled out, seeing smoke, blood, a wounded veteran, 2 terrified children, and a steel pod being dragged out of a burning row house. "Gun down!" one officer shouted. Jonah did. Not because he trusted the scene. Because Milo was swaying. Because Lily was still in the pod. Because Eva was barely upright and Shadow was limping hard now, soot blackened and